Hello, and welcome to another edition of CiviCast, a series of podcasts from the National Civic Impact Accelerator programme, funded by Research England. I'm John Fell, Senior Policy Advisor at the NCIA. In this episode, I spoke to Dr. Femi Owolade, Research Associate at the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research, or CRESR for short, at Sheffield Hallam University. CRESR are one of the key delivery partners of the NCIA programme, and Dr. Owolade is publishing a research paper entitled Developing the Civic University Mission, Lessons from Race Equality Initiatives in Higher Education. This interview was recorded in October 2023, ahead of the publication of Dr. Owolade's paper. But before we talk about that, I asked Dr. Owolade to tell me a bit about his own background and his career journey.
My name is Dr. Femi Owolade, Nigerian by birth. Came to the UK when I was 16. I was actually an athlete. I competed for Nigeria when I was, in my teens, so a long time ago. So I did a PhD in colonial history, did it at King's College London. It was during, the PhD that I began to develop an interest into, equality, diversity and inclusion, and specifically, racial equality, which is what I've written this paper on.
You've written an academic research paper which will be published by the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research and also part of the NCIA programme's outputs.
Yes.
And that research paper is called Developing the Civic University Mission, Lessons from Race Inequality Initiatives in Higher Education. What inspired you to research this topic of equality, diversity and inclusivity in higher education?
While undertaking, my PhD, I looked at, so my topic was on law and British colonial rule in northern Nigeria. I had the opportunity to, observe the source materials and to see the creation of race as a concept itself, Race has become such a big part of present day reality. But the concept of race was created in the 1800s. This was, just a couple of decades before British colonial rule in Africa. Having observed just the fickleness of this concept itself, I began to find ways to deconstruct, the concept of race. And I thought, doing research on, racial equality, that would be a, good way to satisfy my intellectual curiosity.
What were some of the key challenges or barriers you found that universities face in becoming more civic-minded institutions?
Okay, it was one of the expectations from CRESR that I would use my experience in EDI and racial equality to find ways in which systems change can be brought about in the Civic University Mission. Having studied and done research on race equality initiatives like addressing the BAME awarding gap, legislations and decolonization, I thought the journey that the race equality has taken in the last 20-30 years, I thought that the Civic University Mission can learn from these journeys. So the pitfalls, just the things that have been done quite successfully, I think can be replicated in the Civic University missions, and you would actually be surprised by how similar these two concepts are.
Could you give me an example of how the civic mission and the anti-racism kind of missions cross over?
Yes. The one example that comes to mind is the importance of building equitable partnerships. So there's a report that was written by UK universities, was published in 2018, and one of the recommendations is to have equitable partnerships, to ensure that university leaders have conversations with students and with other partners that work in the university. Having the equitable partnerships, I think, has been, one of the important factors that, has led to creating a more racially equal university. I think it's important to give just an example to illustrate this point. So the BAME awarding gap is the difference between, white students and students of the BAME background. So BAME meaning Black, Asian, and ethnic minority, and background in getting a first class or 2-1, and the gap was 13% in 2018. The gap has been closed by about 4% as of 2021, and one of the reasons given for the closing of this gap is the conversations that universities have had since the BAME awarding gap became a real concern. The conversations that have had, the equitable partnerships that has been developed at universities, between university leaders and professional services and students. And I think having this equitable partnerships in the Civic University mission can be very, very important.
Your paper discusses, as you just mentioned, the BAME attainment gap and use the term BAME, which, as we know, stands for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic. My understanding is that that term's not as commonly used now, or maybe people are starting to move away from that term. So why do you use that term in your paper?
The term itself, I call it a grouping. Yeah. Is one that a lot of practitioners and researchers of race and equality have expressed concerns about because it groups just the experiences of the different ethnic groups in the UK. It sort of groups all their experiences and fails to identify the experiences of each individual grouping. And research has shown, lived experiences have shown that there's different ethnic groups have different experiences and they have different challenges, they have different opportunities. So it's the grouping is problematic. I think it's important to actually point out that a lot of organizations and institutions, within the UK have tried to do away with the grouping. But I have used this term as a way of convenience. So I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the research, that has been done in this area in the past, 10 years, they've used the BAME. So describing the awarding gap, you almost have to use, BAME. But, as we move forward, I think it's important to do away with the term.
You mentioned about equitable partnerships and
Yes.
how important they are, the importance of partnerships between students, academics and professional staff. So how can universities foster more equitable partnerships?
The first thing is to look at university leadership. Having university leaders that are committed to equitable partnerships, is very important. And co-production and co-creation is also very important. So I will give, decolonization as an example. In many universities, or the universities I know that I've worked with in the UK, decolonization is almost seen as a term or a call for action that is placed in the margins, engaged by students and not, academic staff. So I think it's important for academic staff, to have, interest in, such issues like decolonization.
What are some examples of good practice that you've seen in universities who are trying to address issues of racial inequality?
Oh, great. I think there are three examples that come to mind. And, these examples are initiatives or things that I was actually, directly involved in. And, these things, did work. So in my previous employment at King's College London, there was an event called Conversations About Race. So the event was held every month between staff and students. And the idea of having a conversation about race is to, break barriers, trying to, speak about, the so-called taboo, in race. Members of staff, said that having these conversations has, helped them to relate to students better. I think another example is building collaborative networks across all the spaces, in the universities. So collaborative networks that address issues that speak directly to the plight of the ethnic, minority. So decolonization is a good example. And so I was part of a collaborative network on decolonization at King's College London. And this network consisted of students and members of staff, so academic members of staff. This was, I think, in my opinion, very effective way of looking at how to decolonize the curriculum. Part of the activities of this network was to audit the curriculum. So we audited the reading list from participating departments in this project. So building this collaborative network among students and members of staff, and infusing a research element into this network, and having some evaluation of the research that has been done as well. I think that's another effective way. And the last but not the least is addressing the BAME awarding gap. The BAME awarding gap is something that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and confronting it and addressing it directly is sometimes just seen as a difficult task, and a task that I believe would almost acknowledge the fact that there is a BAME awarding gap, and putting resource for universities to put resource into addressing it by having conversations, by doing research. I think that would be an admission on the part of the university that the gap actually exists. But I think being upfront about the existence of the BAME awarding gap and addressing it, confronting it, I think is a good example, of good practice.
Do you think initiatives like decolonising the curriculum have had much real impact so far, and what needs to happen for more progress?
I mean, I know a lot has been written on this, on decolonising the curriculum. Though the language that is used to actually explain what a decolonised curriculum would look like is very, very, very difficult. It's very difficult to articulate it. And I think that has affected the way in which impact has been done and the way in which people have understood what you're really trying to say. When you say you want to decolonize a curriculum, are you trying to, bring in marginalized perspectives into the reading list? That some people believe that's what decolonizing the curriculum is. Others believe in making the curriculum more international, bringing works that has been done by different international scholars. And then there's more radical understanding of decolonizing the curriculum, which believes that the entire curriculum in Western universities is so Eurocentric that it should be dismantled, altogether. And so that's a more radical understanding of decolonizing the curriculum. So I think it's important to have a shared understanding of what decolonizing the curriculum is, and I think that should be a starting point, in trying to make a real change. And I think until we have this shared understanding, it becomes very difficult to persuade, university leaders and people that have just very little interest in this decolonizing the curriculum. It's going to be very difficult to persuade them as to what we actually mean by decolonizing the curriculum.
It's so important. Obviously, the use of language. Maybe decolonising is problematic to some people, and the question is whether you pander to those people by using a different term, or it would be more positive. I don't know.
So decolonising is almost like a trigger. Colonization is still, I believe, like a trigger word. It's
certainly
quite similar to like racism. It's almost like you're trying to attack. It's very politicized,
Exactly.
Very politicized.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to put it. So it's a term that raises some wrong emotions. Makes I think, just to be very blunt, makes a lot of white people that I've engaged with, it makes them feel uncomfortable. So when a movement, I call decolonizing the curriculum a movement. When a movement like decolonizing the curriculum is being put on the forefront of discourse in universities and public discourse as well, you almost expect people to feel guilty or to have a negative reaction to it. But I don't think that should come in the way of making a change and actually changing what the curriculum look like, because this present university curriculum is in many ways a reflection of just the Eurocentrism. Is a reflection of in many ways the colonization of minority people.
A reality is that people make political capital out of words which are not necessarily negative, but they put a negative spin on it. So one example I would give is the term woke, and its origins from the Black Civil Rights Movement is now used as an insult and a slur against anyone trying to, tackle any injustice, and has been grasped by people who want to use it in a negative way. and the headline. So when they see a headline of decolonize the curriculum, it's like, this is somehow a threat. And I think that also plays on the themes in your paper as well.
Yes.
About discomfort and change.
Yes.
And to get, to a position of social, or to address social injustices, there has to be some level of discomfort, and which needs to be worked through.
Yes, yes.
So, Anyway, thank you, Dr. Owolade.
Yes.
In your paper, you talk about the limitations of legislation in driving change. So, what policy or systemic changes are needed instead?
So, race is one of the protected characteristics, in the Equality Act 2010. You expect, institutions, to comply with anti-racism practices within their institutions, especially public institutions, to be specific. So it's important to note that on paper, it takes a strong stance against racism. One of the criticisms of the Equality Act is that, it becomes almost like a tick box exercise. So just to give an example, universities are expected to have, inclusion in, their policies, staff training. Inclusion is almost like a buzzword. It's something that, universities pride themselves in. Like, if you ask a university, like, do you have inclusion as part of your policy? They speak of it like with pride, without actually having a deep, look into their practices. It's important to know the difference between how these legislations are written and their applications in the day-to-day workings of the universities. So, research has been conducted by Sarah Ahmed on just how effective, these legislations have been, so staff at universities, still, complain about, feeling excluded, feeling, microaggression. And I think policies that specifically like target issues of race, I think they can be more effective. So there are institutional initiatives that specifically target race inequalities. I think an example is the initiation of the Advanced HE Race Equality Charter, which provides a framework to identify and self-reflect on their institutional and cultural barriers. There's got to be conversations with university leaders. People that are really interested in decolonizing the curriculum need to speak very openly. The barriers, of course, that have to be shattered and brought down as well. I think having these human interactions and conversations, would help to make everyone, come on board and make a change really happen. Legislations are positive on paper, but actually doing the job, putting people on the ground, to actually see that, this legislations are being followed. I think that's what is quite missing right now.
Yeah, it's the implementation.
Implementation.
The actions behind the positive words.
Yes.
Okay. So then, on that note, what advice would you give university leaders who want to make their institutions more civic-minded and anti-racist?
The most obvious one would just be to foreground and to prioritize these issues, like being a civic university. Civic, needs to be placed at the forefront of the university's public engagement. It can't just be something that is seen almost like an add-on. It's got to be a language, that is used in a positive light. I think working with strategic partners is also important. In my experience, I've observed that the anti-racist university mission has excluded partners. So partners like community leaders that really work on racial equality. Community organization, charity groups that have experience, maybe not academic experience, but they have practical experience on building, race anti-racist community. Working with these partners and making sure that the relationship is equitable, I think that's a good way.
Touching on what we said earlier on, Dr. Owolade, about the limitations of legislation, how can universities avoid tokenistic approaches to equality and make it a really embedded part of their culture?
Having rigorous training is certainly an important step. In all the universities, or most of the universities that I've worked in, I think that a lot can be done. A lot more can be done on training the members of staff, and using good training materials, using better learning tools and resources to make sure that the staff actually understand what it is to be an anti-racist university, and not just making it like a token. I think another thing that universities can do is to be less risk averse. I think universities tend to be very cautious in their approach and not being too radical. You spoke about being woke, the woke thing, and now it's seen like as a bad term, or as a bad concept. And I think universities can be more brave in their stance against racism, calling out racism, showing solidarity to people that are working in this field, and of course foregrounding and prioritizing the work that people in this field do. This is a big issue that I've had direct experience with. So a lot of people that work in this field, in the field of racism and anti-racism, they do the work pro bono, free of charge. They are not well paid for it. They're part-time members of staff. They're not employed on a full-time basis. So I think giving like a reward to creating like a reward system for people doing this sort of work, I think that could be more encouraging for them, and that would mean that universities don't just have a tokenistic approaches to equality.
Yeah, because going back to what you're saying before, ticking boxes, we can all go on a training course and mark the tick to say we've had EDI training, and then those statistics can be reported from a university leader. What would better quality EDI training or race equality training look like? Is that intrinsic, or is that tied to the voices of the teachers and the people creating those materials? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think bringing experts who are actually working on the field, having workshops where experts, preferably people of minority people, because I strongly believe in representation. So I think that would just make it seem like that universities actually care, and this is just not a tokenistic thing, So having workshops, having expert opinions, drafting the questions that specifically speak about racial equality, because I've had the privilege of seeing a lot of questions on this training, on this EDI training, and the ones that relate to racial equality, they can almost be used interchangeably with gender, or just the other parts of the EDI, or the protected characteristics under the EDI. I think it's important to do away with this all-encompassing approach to providing a solution. The questions have to be specific to race equality, and not just EDI.
Obviously, you've written this paper, and you're also involved in other activity in the programme. So I understand you're working with our partners, the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, on the Action Learning Programme as part of the NCIA programme. I know it's still quite early days in that process, but could you tell me a bit about your involvement so far?
It's really been a good experience. It's been a really good. There's been some interesting emerging themes coming out already, and I'm really excited about analyzing the data that I'm currently collecting as an observer, and writing up the outputs.
And you find the themes that we talked about a little today, the equitable partnerships, are they strong in the Action Learning Programme outputs too? Yes,
they actually are. Like they're just the importance of just having this conversations, having equitable partnerships, and the importance of having strong leadership, leaders that would communicate with community groups, that would relate with community groups, and the leaders are committed to having, this equitable partnerships too. I think, that's one thing that's come out a lot, in the sessions I've observed, and yes, I'm really looking forward to how it pans out.
Thank you to Dr. Owolade for talking about his forthcoming research paper, Developing the Civic University Mission, Lessons from Race Equality Initiatives in Higher Education. You'll find a link to Dr. Owolade's paper in the text accompanying this podcast, wherever you might be listening to us from. If you'd like to find out more about the NCIA programme, you can also find links to our webpage and social media too. We'll have another edition of CiviCast ready for you very soon, but until then, thank you for listening.